Welcome to Rewilding Love. This season is with a couple on the brink of divorce.
This is episode number 6, Alicia walking on eggshells.
I may have just made the biggest mistake of my life.
I don't understand where things went wrong.
In any given moment, his vibe just changes, and it's like, boom, like you hate me all of a sudden.
To understand that our experience comes from within, to me, is the ultimate in empowerment.
I had divorce papers signed, ready to go.
It's a ride at a fun fair. We go up and down. We are in up mood and we love each other, and we go into a low mood and we hate each other.
See, for the most part, I'm Pirates of the Caribbean, where there's only one drop and one rise. Okay, everything else is pretty fucking flat in my life.
Right.
Hers, it's corkscrewing. It jumps the track sometimes. Like, it does crazy shit.
Basically diagnosing me with borderline personality disorder.
Wow, you can see how mother-in-laws get such a bad rap.
I'm not this monster.
You know, we want her to decide what to do about the relationship when she's on stable ground. I'm not saying that she would need to stay with him.
You are listening to Rewilding Love with me, Angus Ross.
And me, Rohini Ross.
Rewilding Love is a podcast about relationships.
We believe that love never disappears completely in relationships. It can always be rewilded. Listen in as we guide a real couple back to their natural state of love.
Relax and enjoy the show. So I must say, I found this episode quite refreshing after my exhaustive attempts to leave no stone unturned with Mateo in this respect of getting to see that Alicia is not responsible for corrupting his sense of well-being. You, on the other hand, seem to do a masterful job in getting to see exactly that with the cards turned in the other direction. So Mateo is not responsible for corrupting her well-being.
Well, she definitely had some light bulb moments, and I think opened up her eyes to seeing things differently, which was really lovely. But she definitely started off blaming him and feeling like he was responsible for her behavior through his behavior, and that pushed her to the brink.
Yeah, but then nevertheless, you were then able to rather expertly, in my estimation, use that as a way to clarify how he is not responsible for her suffering.
Based on what we talked about this morning and you kind of seeing things fresh and new, it seems like one of the, I was reflecting on and thinking about the key themes. One was for you seeing that, when he gets destabilized, that you don't need to take it personally. And then the other piece was the recognition that when you get stirred up, that the more you kind of understand what's happening for you, then the less likely you are going to be to react from that place.
Definitely.
So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, for sure. I think it's going to be one of those things that's going to be a lot, not trial and error, so to speak, but a lot of practice in a sense to recognize when he does go there, because I view him in such a different perspective than everybody else in my life, essentially. And I view him with like really high regard, is to try and remember like whatever he's saying, it's because he's stirred up and it's not against me. And so that's going to take a lot of active practice, I think.
What makes it look like that might be difficult?
I guess what would make it difficult is I think just the current state that we're in, where like I'm uneasy about it. Like I'm not completely certain where his head is at or what he's truly thinking, because sometimes one of the things he's told me is like, have you not seen the signs or this and that? And it's like, well, because you throw mixed signals at me. Like in a certain moment you want to be all, in a conversation having fun, but then seconds later like you switch modes. And so I need to figure out how to navigate when that is to occur and recognize that maybe now he's in his thoughts and let him be there, not to start getting in my own head.
Yeah. And so it sounds like, I just want to make sure I'm understanding, it sounds like he can run hot and cold.
Extremely.
Okay, so he can be like totally fine, all good, and then before you
in
know
the
it, like he's
snap of a
just,
second.
and then he's just like,
Yes.
you know, okay.
And one thing that I've noticed is like when I change my mode or mood to be that way, I'd be like, now I'm like, no, now you've upset me or something. Then he retracts. And it's like, I don't want that vicious cycle. Like, because you've now hurt me, now you're like afraid and want to then be nice.
Yeah.
It's like, I'd rather us just live in the peace and harmony. And if there is a communication, you know, error or disagreement or whatever, like, let's acknowledge it in the moment, but then move past it. Like, it doesn't need to be more than 10 minutes. And one of the things that he has said to me before is like, if we've gotten to like some sort of altercation, nothing like really traumatic, but say like a 10-minute argument that hasn't been a blow up, it's just like disagreements of minds, he'll turn around and be like, well, now you ruined my whole day. And I'm like, 10 minutes isn't your whole day for it to be ruined.
Yeah.
So I think those are like the other disconnects where like,
Yeah.
I'm able to leave things and leave them without having to reference and bring up the past. But he definitely carries it on. And he's admitted to like, he says it takes him a little longer to process. Sometimes it takes him a day or so. And I'm like, to myself, and I wouldn't share that with him because I don't want to like knock him for it. But I'm like, I don't think it's necessary to process for over 24 hours.
Right. Well, you're pretty adept, and it sounds like you probably, you know, this was modeled to you growing up. Like, you can kind of get escalated, but then it's done, over with, move on. Like, you don't need to hold on to anything. So that's kind of something that you're just naturally inclined to do, whereas it sounds like something happens and then he kind of ruminates on it, and it takes a while before he's able to let it go.
Yeah, it's interesting that she uses that word practice. And obviously, and I understand why she would use that word. I guess for me, this is more a case of understanding. And I think that through the experience of taking on board this understanding, really, I think how it unfolds is the understanding gets clarified and more clarified and more clarified. And that's kind of really how we grow in our levels of consciousness. Through understanding, we just get better equipped to see the situation unfold in real time, where we get caught up, and how we can make the other party responsible for how we, well, in our innocence, make the other party responsible for how we're feeling inside. And obviously that is the direction that we are not pointing in.
Yeah, it's true that it's about understanding, and you could look at it as a learning curve, that over time it gets easier and easier to see that our experience comes from within. It comes from the thoughts that we're identifying with in our own consciousness, and it isn't a direct one-to-one relationship between what someone is doing and what we're feeling, that there's the variable of thought that's actually what we're experiencing.
Yeah, and I think that the idea of having to practice would suggest that you've got to work really hard at this, and you've got to use the intellectual machinery to, in a sense, kind of summon up this technique in the moment, which I think is going to be counter in a very profound way to what we're pointing to.
Yeah, and I'm really looking for Alicia to see more clearly how Mateo isn't responsible for her experience. And in the last session, we looked at her being able to see his insecurity more, so that she was less likely to take what he was doing personally. And in this session, what I'm really hoping to achieve is that she can see how she can take better care of herself, so that she doesn't get pushed to the brink and feel compelled to behave in a reactive way. I really want her to see that it's in her best interest. It isn't really about doing this for him. It's about her taking care of herself and her having the benefit of that.
But I think it's also going to be helpful to understand what how life looks through his lens. Mm-hmm. And because I hear two very different lenses.
Right.
Your lens seems very different than his lens.
Yeah.
And it's not that his lens needs to be any different for actually things to go better between the two of you. Because I know that it could be that, well, if he was just more positive, then that would be way, and why would he want to do all that ruminating? He's clearly suffering for, like, you see things that you're like, why would you do that? It just doesn't make sense to you.
Yeah.
But what I think would be helpful is for you to really be able to be putting yourself in his shoes and understand the logic of why he does it the way he does it. not because you have to agree with it, but because understanding it is going to help you to be able to kind of sort of get creative about how to navigate those, like we talked about, you know, you can figure out how to deal with frailties with people. It's like you'll be able to be more creative about navigating that with him, even if you're not on the same page.
This sort of sets Alicia up quite nicely to see Mateo's psychological innocence. I love the way that you are prompting her to consider what it would be like to put yourself in Mateo's shoes. And in that respect, I feel like she will start to maybe have a bit more compassion, or start looking in the direction of having a bit more compassion.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, go ahead.
Thank you for your permission. I wasn't sure if you were finished, that's all.
No, well, I'm interested to see what your response to that would be.
I was really, well, I wasn't thinking in terms of psychological innocence, although I agree. I was really looking at it in terms of increasing her empathy, for her to be able to have more understanding about his experience, and the natural byproduct of that would be for her to have more compassion. But that is another way of saying, seeing his psychological innocence, which is really, I'm doing my best to try and have her see that he's doing the best that he can.
Yeah, so in this next segment, you're going to continue to help her see things from his perspective. I think you do a really great job at that.
Would it make sense to you that pushing you away is less scary than actually being close to you?
I think for him it is. I think he's afraid that he may get too hurt if he's too close to me.
Yeah.
But I think that's counterintuitive in a marriage and in a relationship.
No, but could you see how that might make sense to him? Yeah. Especially, you know, when you said that he says he has abandonment issues, like it would make sense that if his constant fear is that you're not going to be there one day. See, none of this is rational, but it's kind of these, and a lot of it is invisible.
Yeah.
To us, we don't even realize that we're doing it, or we're doing it, but we think we're doing it for one reason when really it's another reason.
Yeah.
Because it's invisible to us. But it's like if he's really on a deeper level scared of intimacy, right?
He's like terrified.
Yeah. Really,
like he more associates it as like sending her mixed signals because it's like too intimate and it means like we're fine. And I'm like, yeah, there's moments of that for sure. But then there's also just like kind of also moments of needs. And, you know, I think that sometimes he views it a little bit more, I don't want to say like more like a female, but like he puts more pressure on it that way.
And what do you mean by that?
Like I think like for women, obviously we get very emotionally like tied up when there's intimacy. Whereas men typically doesn't seem like they always do. And so I think that he views it very much like we do, where it's like it has to be because it's like true pure love and this and that.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot. That's what you mean by having a lot of pressure on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, because this is about what you can do in the situation, whether or not that shifts for him, whether or not he has an insight that helps him feel safer in an intimate relationship, we don't know if that's going to happen initially, right? But if you have someone who's scared, so fundamentally what we're dealing with is his fear, right? His insecurity. It's bridging the gap so that he can see that it's safe. And so when you look at it that way, do you see how the way you show up bridges that gap, and do you see how the way you show up increases that gap? Do you see the differences?
So what I'm beginning to notice about Alicia is that she's starting to get into a much better feeling. And I think there's a sort of proportional to that feeling is a I don't know, an attitude which is starting to become more philosophical rather than judgmental. I like that.
Absolutely. I agree that she's able to take more of a step back and see things with more perspective. And so she's taking things less personally. And I did ask her quite a pointed question and that can she see how her behavior would have an impact on Mateo, given that he's sensitive to reactivity. And she actually wasn't able to answer that question in the way that I posed it. So I did take a different tag to see if she was able to see from that perspective how her behavior damages rapport with Mateo. And so I do that here.
Excellent.
In September, when he finally told you he was unhappy, and so far as looking at papers, it sounds like, you had no idea before then?
I was clueless.
Okay, so he was keeping this all internal, and all of a sudden, and you were gone a lot anyway, but then he says in September, this isn't working for me.
Mm-hmm.
And his reasons were?
Nothing. He
I'm
just
unhappy?
didn't want to be in this relationship anymore. That he used the words like, I'm not in love with you.
So Alicia here really is adamant that she didn't know and that this came completely out of the blue. And I think that that's important to take note, because it's difficult for all of us to take responsibility and personal accountability for our behavior, especially if we have shame associated with that. And I think that part of the reason why she starts off with this "I had no idea" point of view is that's much more comfortable for her. And it's much more painful for her to actually see that some of her behavior was very difficult and really had a negative impact on the relationship. And so it's really key for me to create a very safe space for her so that she can take that step back, like I said earlier, and have some neutrality and be able to look at things without becoming consumed by shame for herself. And so that's what she was able to do here. So I really want to acknowledge her for her courage and her willingness to reflect, because she was able to start looking more deeply and see things more clearly.
That it was a part of it is like, because I have my blow-ups or whatever, and a lot of the times when I would have those blow-ups, it would be because I'd be home and I only have like 4 or 5 days at home, and he's running off to hang out with his friends, and I got jealous, definitely. And I was like, I want to spend time with you.
Right.
Like when I'm away, and I'm away also on weekends, like you can hang out with your friends. And I felt like I was the last priority. And that's something I've always expressed to him. I was like, I never felt like I came first.
Okay.
And I always felt like I put him first.
Okay. So in his mind, the thing that he mentioned was the blow-ups was hard for him. And I'm not saying this is accurate, but to the best of what you know, it could be in his mind that these blow-ups are intolerable. I can't be married to someone who blows up this way. So we need to get a divorce. And he says it, but then he does really care about you and doesn't really want that. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't move forward. But you've been in kind of this limbo. No man's land for all this time since then, because he hasn't been able to really get on board with the marriage and with you as you are.
Right. I feel like sometimes he knows how to trigger me, and like, because I think he's scared and insecure, like he almost wants to put me in the same state.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that makes sense, because people, what happens is, it's like if you have, so everyone's moods go up and down, right? So you have two people, one person's in a low mood, let's say one person's in a good mood. Typically, one person is going to either pull that person down, or this person's going to help pull that one up. So when he gets into a low, scared state, it sounds like he's kind of like, mm-hmm. It's like the pull is to sort of join him down there. Mm-hmm. And then eventually you blow up, and then it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy where he's like, see, I can't be married to her. Look at what she does.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like he's always saying, when's the next one? And I'm like, you keep putting it out there to have another one. And it's like, and the thing is I've kind of shared, like one of my girlfriends is like, I feel like with the poking the bear is like, he's such a culprit. And then when he gets what he wants, then he turns into the victim. And it's like, that's not fair, because I feel like I'm the victim. Like, I feel like I've been pushed to a certain point. Yeah. And it's like, I don't want to be that. Like, I don't
Right.
want to have a blow up. Like,
Yeah.
I've told him so many times, I'm like, the blow up takes so much energy out of me. And then I have to come down from it. Like, it's not fun.
Yeah. As I'm listening, I'm looking for what seems most leverage. And what I'm hearing, where you're wanting to shift and where he's saying it would be helpful to him, it sounds like the blowing up doesn't feel good to you. And that you would really like to have a different experience around that. And he's also saying that would be really great on his end too. Not that there isn't his own stuff to work on.
Yeah.
So from what we talked about this morning, how do you see that being helpful, or is it even related to the blowing up? Like, what do you see about that now?
I mean, I see how it's counterproductive, and I see that, like, it doesn't help us, and it doesn't. I know that. Sometimes I feel like with him, like, I say things so many times, like I stated earlier, and it just doesn't register. It doesn't register, and then I start saying it in different ways, and then it still doesn't register, and then it gets me to the point I'm like, what will get you to wake up?
So that's how you get his attention, basically.
That's how I get his attention, because otherwise I feel like I'm being ignored.
Well, she hasn't crossed over to the other side yet, in the sense that she still is thinking that Mateo is responsible for her suffering. But I do see a certain amount of tenderization that will perhaps lead to higher ground, or at least a higher vantage point, where she will begin to see the sense in what you're pointing to.
Is that a new coaching term, tenderization?
Yes, very important part of the coaching process, as far as I'm concerned. Did I just snort then?
You did just snort.
I thought I'd add a little bit of colour to the whole experience.
So, yes, and what I hear in this part is that you can really get a sense of what her logic is. Like, part of what she's learned is that she has to blow up to get his attention. And so, of course, she's going to keep doing that if that's the only way she gets his attention. The trouble is, it sounds like that the blow-ups just have to get more and more in order for her to grab his attention.
So she's got in the habit of throwing in this stun grenade so that she can get everything that she needs to say off her chest. The problem being is that she's using a little bit too much incendiary.
Otherwise, he doesn't pay attention to her, is what she's saying.
Right.
Yeah, obviously the rapport and the relationship is really suffering as a result of that. But I think it's important that, we understand her logic and that she understands her logic, so that then she can start to see what the other alternatives might be that would actually work better in the situation. And so we're just going to hear a little bit more about what her experience is like.
Your intentions and what he experiences, they're not lining up. Like, your good intentions isn't being experienced. Like what you were saying about wanting to, have him know that you're on his team and that you're on his side, and that that's not being experienced that way.
Yeah, no, and it's hard because I feel like, and maybe this is because he's sensitive or that he's insecure or whatever, but I feel like everybody else can see that I am on his team.
Yeah. Right.
And that my intentions are always been good and out of like the goodness of my heart, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, it's like he doesn't want to see that I'm good because he wants to see me as this person that cuts people out of his life, out of my life. But that's my protection, or that I sometimes like have an issue with somebody like his mom, but like he's had those same issues. Like I just want to be respected in certain regards.
Yeah.
When all of this transpired, he did tell his friends and mom and everybody, like, that he wanted a divorce. Like, his mom cut me off. Like, stopped talking to me completely. Right as it came out, his mom sent him a book that I guess she got through her therapist and whatnot. And it was, like, basically diagnosing me with borderline personality disorder.
Oh, my goodness.
The title of the book was Run Boy Run, and it like came to our house, and I started reading it, and I was like, I remember started crying, and this is like right after I just had finished the relationship handbook, and because I didn't want him to get like upset that I was upset or like get more angry at me. I was like, I told him, I was like, I'm just tearing because I realized that this is your mom's insecurity with our situation, and this was like her way of trying to help. But like, that does affect me. Like, I think that like, it was such an attack on my character, because when it came out, it's like, I'm this terrible person. I have these blow-ups. I have borderline personality disorder. It was like I was the problem. And I feel like I'm viewed as now in front of people. Like, I feel like they're starting to see like where it was both. But in the beginning, it was like I was this horrendous person.
Right, yeah.
And like, that was really hard to deal with, because I was like, I'm not this monster. Like, yes, I have issues. Everybody does. But like, it sucked. It eats me up, and I like lose my appetite, and I'm upset, and I'm constantly crying, and I don't want to be constantly crying.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I'm glad you gave me sort of those additional details in terms of like the book, and so I guess it gives me a sense of how you're being perceived and how extreme his experience is, even if that's not your experience. Like, that's the intensity of what his experience is.
Or how he's related it to people for them to draw the conclusions that they do.
Right.
And it's like, it with him, or like even his mom, like to do that, like, it's like people forget how much I've done for him, and like how I did take on all the responsibility for us to have a household and everything. Like, it just, everything gets forgotten that I, like, it just all of a sudden, I'm this terrible person, quit on her, just divorce her, no one liked her anyway, or something like that, you know. It's like, it, that's what hurts me.
Yeah, right.
And then him not, like, I don't need an apology for like the divorce thing or anything, but I feel like it needs to be like admitted to everybody, like either that it was a mistake or that he does want to be in this, because I feel like I just get looked at like in such a poor way, or that I'm just like this idiot that's begging for more abuse in a sense.
Wow, you can see how mother-in-laws get such a bad rap. I don't know how Alicia comes back from that, in the sense that she can never forgive her mother-in-law. I'm sure she will. Hopefully she will. But that's quite a power play that really, I don't know, I would really take that very personally if I didn't know what I know now.
Well, luckily your mother-in-law isn't sending me books.
You know, that's taking passive aggression to a whole different level.
Well, anyway.
Maybe not so passive. That sounds like out-and-out warfare as far as I'm concerned. You can see.
Well, let's come back to focusing on Alicia and Mateo. And, you know, clearly Alicia does have some idea as to why Mateo served her with divorce papers. I'm glad that she's able to share all of this information with me now, because I'm sure it was difficult for her, but we're getting to see a fuller picture as to what was really going on between them and how it got to that point. And we can really hear how much she's suffering, how she feels misunderstood. She's taking it very personally. She's not only upset that she feels judged by other people, but I also think she's judging herself as a terrible person.
Yeah, the divorce papers are one thing, but I think if the mother-in-law had her way, she'd have men in white coats coming round to put Alicia in a straitjacket.
Anyway, so really, you know, looking at the theme of psychological innocence, Alicia is doing the best that she can with the understanding that she has, just like Mateo is doing the same thing. And really what I'm looking to help her with and lean into in the next segment is I really want her to see how she can become more stable within herself, and how ultimately that's going to benefit her no matter what happens in the relationship.
It gets to the point where, like yesterday, like the blow up did turn around, and I was just like, now I'm done. Like, now you've pushed me to the point of no return. I was like, give me the papers and I'm signing. I was like, I don't want to go to therapy. I don't want to. I was like, I'm done. I was like, you literally are just hurting me.
Yeah.
And this has been like 7 months of extreme pain and roller coaster. And as soon as I say that, then he retreats and he's like, no, I want us to be forever, and I want us to go to therapy together, and I want, like, okay, so if you know all of that, why are you still gonna, like, not work with me there?
Yeah. Well, as we talked about, when his state of mind gets destabilized, kind of all bets are off. And it seems like it feels, unfair that you kind of being yourself has been perceived in this sort of diagnosable extreme behavior. But sort of I want to kind of put that aside and really look at what feels better to you, And what I hear you say is that you're recognizing that it feels better to you to feel more stable internally and to not, and I would say it would be more empowering for you to have that internal stability in a way that you can't really be provoked. Like let's say whether he's doing it consciously or unconsciously, you'll feel better not kind of being able to be pushed to that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But he knows what triggers me too, and it's something that I, during our
so
earlier session.
Yeah, so what do you see as the triggers that are most difficult to not be provoked by?
Right now, the triggers that are provoking me are definitely like him saying divorce or leaving or all of that, or that he's uncertain and he's not certain about us together, or he doesn't know if he wants this forever and this and that. Like that all triggers me.
Yeah.
And puts me in that state of fear.
Yeah, and then you blow up.
Well, I internalize it until I blow up because I'm like, oh my God, you're giving me nothing. Like, like, anytime he said that to me, I've literally just been like, okay, I'm going to give you your space. And I back off. And I don't speak about it then, but then it's like a few more actions or a few more things. And then I'm like, well, now I'm literally like, now you said this 3 times. Now I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like you said, it takes 2 to make the marriage work. And I feel like I've been holding the marriage. And my girlfriend this past week told me, she's like, from what I've seen, it's like you're the only one doing the work, keeping the marriage together. And I'm like, that's not a good feeling, and it's not fun for me to know that other people are seeing that.
Yeah.
Because like I see them in a happy marriage, I see our other friends in a happy marriage. It's like I'm doing all the work, and like I said, like it doesn't even make like a bowl of pasta for me, or like
So let's say he gets over his fear and is like, okay, I'm really back in. Now, what gets him stirred up is he doesn't deal well with emotional reactivity. Whether it's from his history, like for whatever reason, he doesn't have the staying power to be able to handle emotional reactivity. So, and you're saying you don't really like that much of it anyway. So it's win-win on both sides. So let's say he's in, but he's going to have his moments of, doing all of these things that he occasionally does. Hopefully not with the same kind of intensity, but he's not going to be perfect. What I would say for you is going to be, and this to me is really about personal empowerment, is to be able to write out your emotional experience in a way that's better for you. It's as a byproduct, it's going to be better for him, but that's not the purpose of it. The main reason is it's going to be better for you.
Yeah.
The byproduct is that it's going to be better for the relationship. So what I want you to start to see, and you can just be reflecting on this, as we're talking in between the sessions, and just kind of recognizing like what starts to give you the clue that you're getting activated, like before the blow up. It has to be before the blow up. But like what starts to let you know that you're getting stirred up?
Not kissing me goodbye before you leave the house, or coming in and not saying hello, kiss me hello. Lack of intimacy, especially like when I've tried to like even come on to him.
So those are all of the externals, but how do you know internally? What do you notice is sort of like, what are the emotional signals, the physiological signals that let you know that you're starting to get stirred up?
Definitely like words, or like even just like any bit of communication. Like we don't really text throughout the day or anything.
but I'm talking about your feeling state. Like what would be an early warning signal internally for you that lets you know that you're getting stirred up?
Oh, overthinking.
Okay, and how does that feel? Like what?
Like an anxiety rush.
Okay, so you feel like your heart beating faster.
Like I'm so uncertain or nervous.
So if we're looking at, this being the baseline of peace and well-being, and this being, full-blown panic attack, you're noticing it when it's kind of like a 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
So what I want you to start to get more familiar with is, what does a 2 and a 3 and a 4 feel like? Because that's going to help you to take better care of yourself. So when you're at a 7 and 8, all that, it's like the feelings are pretty strong, and it's kind of like just the train's left the station almost, and you just got to ride it out. Mm-hmm. But when you start to notice more like, oh, I'm getting a little stirred up, 2, 3, then there's much more of a likelihood to be able to course correct and get yourself settled without having to go through the full-on experience of anxiety.
Well, what I'm noticing here is that, once again, you're doing a very good job of trying to steer Alicia in a direction where she can have hopefully some insight and some clarity around the role of thought and also her state of mind, more importantly. So I think the value in that is that she will now hopefully start to consider what are some of the areas where she gets caught up. She starts to recognize where she even begins that process of getting caught up, and she starts to hopefully recognize that quicker. And so you're doing a great job in trying to familiarize her with that idea that there is enormous benefit to be garnered from being able to recognize where one's state of mind is and how it can lead us into rack and ruin pretty quickly if in a low mood we start throwing oxygen at that fire. So I like the idea that that's something that she would consider. And it's I think that would be a turning point for her if she can really take that on board.
Yeah, I'm really aware of how externally focused she is. She's really not able to identify very easily any of her internal cues in terms of what her state of mind is and how she's doing. She's very much referencing the things that Mateo does or doesn't do. And that makes sense because she thinks that that's what's responsible for her behavior. But I'm hoping here that I'm planting some seeds and pointing her very directly to how she can become more attuned to her internal experience and the signals that her emotions give her, and actually see how to take better care of herself of that as a result of that. And that ultimately this is for her own well-being and state of mind, that she pays attention to these cues rather than paying attention to what Mateo's doing or not doing. When she starts to notice that she's in that place of overthinking, or that she's starting to feel anxiety, when she uses her emotions as a way to give her that signal, then that can give her pause and help remind her to take care of herself, so that she puts the oxygen mask on herself first and is able to meet her own needs in that way, so that she's not letting herself, go to the brink of a blow up, and then it doesn't take probably very much for it to tip over into some escalation at that point. So I'm really hoping that she's getting the care that I have about how she is doing in all of this, and that there's a way for her not to be a victim to Mateo. There's a way for her to take personal responsibility for taking care of herself. And that's going to ultimately help her to get on more stable ground. And, we want her to decide what to do about the relationship when she's on stable ground. I'm not saying that she would need to stay with him, but I want her to be able to make that decision for the clearest place inside of herself possible.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. And then what I like about this next segment that's coming up, it's almost like, you're helping Alicia unwrap this care package of understanding that's beginning to help her see that she's not responsible for Mateo's suffering.
He says you have blow-ups, but it also sounds like he's saying things too.
Oh, yeah.
So he has his own blow-ups. It's
Yeah.
not like he's not having them as well.
It's just not like a screaming and...
Okay, so it's not as potentially high intensity, but it's still something.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you have your sort of bandwidth of what you can handle, and he has his bandwidth of what he can handle. And it sounds like there's going to need to be adjustments on both ends, right? So you don't want as much of the, negativity coming your way. It feels like, I can't, it needs to decrease some in order for me to be okay. And he's saying the same thing. It sounds like when he says the blow-ups are too much, that he can't handle as much of those blow-ups from you. So you're both kind of asking each other for some behavior modification, shall we say, to make it easier on each other.
Yeah.
Now that part of it, to me, when there's a goodwill and good feeling in the relationship, you guys figure that out. You'll figure out how to not have so many blow-ups and have it not scare him, basically. You'll figure out how to not scare him. And he'll also, with goodwill, figure out how not to hurt your feelings. Not to perfect, right? So it's not like you're never, ever going to have a blow-up again. It's not that he's never going to be mean again. But decrease it enough so that it's more manageable and more of a good feeling rather than a bad feeling.
Yeah, I mean, that is, essentially what I would love to get to.
Yeah. So the goodwill piece then is going to be key. And it sounds like you've been doing your best to give him space.
Yeah.
But it's sort of at the expense of you feeling like you're walking on eggshells. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't really increase goodwill because it's not even, like you actually feel worse and you're trying to take care of him, but you actually end up feeling worse. So it doesn't increase goodwill because you're feeling worse.
Yeah.
So...
and it's also my interpretation that the blow-ups are like the main cause. It's like, I also don't know because he's not letting me in. Like, it could be other stuff that I'm doing that I wouldn't know.
Right. Well, at least let's just work with what we know.
Right.
So far. So that's what you know.
Right.
And then you get that book coming in. I mean, there's a hint that something's going on around that. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, since he sort of pulled the rug out and said, I don't know if I want to be married to you, has this impacted the blow-ups between the two of you at all, or has it been worse, better?
It's impacted them in a way that I keep a lot more inside.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So would you say that you're kind of, it's almost like you're on notice, basically, and so you're having to try to behave, feel like you're, having to behave a certain way, or else, that's it. So I'm wondering, I guess what I'm thinking about is, because this pressure of walking on eggshells, I'm thinking about how, at least during this time while you're here, how to take that pressure off of you.
I think it would be for there to be an understanding. If I say something, don't take it completely to heart and put it in the negative and comparing yourself to me.
Right. So let's say he does that. Like, let's say you're just yourself and he takes it the wrong way. Would it end if you were able to not take that personally? If it's like, oh yeah, that just happens. He does that sometimes. Like, would that...
Yes, but I feel like it hurts my feelings to think that I hurt his.
So what if... Okay, this is really important. What if it's not your fault if you hurt his feelings?
I still would feel guilt over hurting him.
But what if... see, that guilt doesn't make sense if it's not your fault. So let's talk about feelings. So feelings, like we talked about earlier, we feel our thoughts, right? So just like you have thoughts and you feel the impact of your thoughts. He has thoughts and he feels the impact of his thoughts. You saying something doesn't hit him. He feels his thinking. So you could be saying something really lovely, but his thinking is really negative, and he's feeling his thinking. He's not feeling what you're saying. Are you saying that you would feel guilty?
If I upset him, yeah, probably.
Even though it's his own thinking?
Yeah, because I would feel like I would end up either being convinced that it's my fault.
Mm-hmm.
Even
because
though I think
he would convince you?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is where I want you to kind of just get really clear. It's not your responsibility what he feels. Ever. Even if you behave badly, it's not your responsibility how he feels. Ever. So I want you to hear that in a way that it kind of, you get it experientially, because the way that you're feeling this pressure of walking on eggshells is actually because of this more than it is because of him, because of the guilt that you're feeling. And if he can convince you that you're responsible for how he feels, well, it's actually on you to see it clearly so that he can't convince you of that. So you could be, so let's say Angus is screaming at me. If I feel bad, that's on me, that's not on him. I'm not condoning that. But my feelings are coming from what's going on here. It's not coming from what's happening there. I might be, God, he's having a really bad day, he's freaking out. Mm-hmm. I might be, oh my God, I'm a worthless human being. But that's going to be determined by what's going on here. And it's not his fault how I feel.
Yeah.
It's on him to do his best to behave as best he can. But it's not his responsibility how I feel. So for that to get really clear inside of you, because the way that it's set up is that he's telling you you're responsible for how he's feeling, and you're saying, oh, yes, I am.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah.
oh. And what I'm saying is like, oh, no, you're not.
Yeah.
And for you to see that, you'll have an immunity to whatever he throws your way. So it's like, you know, when someone throws you the hot potatoes, like you gotta catch it to burn. It's like you go, not mine.
Yep.
Not mine. It's like, you're responsible for me feeling bad. Not mine.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to catch that hot potato because it's not you. You 100% cannot be responsible for how someone else feels because it's coming from inside of them.
Yeah.
So you being you, if he gets bothered by it, you can course correct. What's happening is that because you're reacting to his taking things negatively, you're not able to kind of have perspective on how to course correct. Right? You're kind of going way over here.
Yeah.
When it's like, oh, he's just having a bad day, you would course correct, you know, in a different way, not to go all the way over here and feel bad and sad and guilty about it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what I want you to experiment with, and this is maybe going to take a little undoing because you've been walking on these eggshells for a while, but I want you to experiment, if you're willing, with leaning into what feels natural to you, not what you're trying to manage yourself to do. So if that's, but in a way that's respectful. Yeah. So it's like if you want to play really loud music or whatever, I don't know what it's going to be, but it's like you'll check it out with him. Like, but you follow the inclination first.
Yeah.
You don't. No, he doesn't want that. Oh, I shouldn't do that. Like, because that's the overthinking coming in.
Yeah.
What I want you to just kind of lean into is that freedom. Like when you talk about that giddy little girl, like to just lean into that. That's you. That's you unfiltered.
Yeah,
that's you
it's
know.
Like I'm talkative and I don't shut up because I'm like a chatty Cathy, but that's just like me.
Yeah. And so you doing that, and then you notice like, oh, he wants quiet, and you ask, do you need some quiet? It's like, yeah, you're talking too much. Rather than, you know, making yourself feel bad that you did something wrong, you just say, okay, you go call a friend or something. But it's not walking on eggshells to make sure that he's okay, because you are not responsible for him being okay. You can't be.
Yeah.
And you're never going to be able to get that right, because you can't be responsible for him being okay. If he's not okay, that's on him. And even if he's not okay and he tells you it's your fault he's not okay, it's still on him. Now, I'm not giving you carte blanche to just freak out on him, right? I want to be clear.
Yeah, no.
It's like, obviously for you, you don't want that, you know. But it's not got anything to do with him being okay.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
What I'm addressing in this past segment is that the way that Alicia is working so hard to not upset Mateo, it's contributing to the likelihood that she's going to end up having one of her blowouts. And she's not seeing that. She's going around walking on eggshells, trying to manage her experience by managing his experience, because she thinks if she can manage to not upset him, then she won't be upset. But it ultimately ends up just giving her so much pressure and makes, life much harder. And ultimately, I think ends up building resentment. And then the blow-ups naturally flow from there. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's like she's just jumped into a swimming pool of feeling like a kid, thinking they can hold their breath for an inordinate amount of times. And at some point, she's going to have to exhale. And her exhaling in her world is to have a blowout and to probably unleash a whole barrage of vitriol in Mateo's direction.
One of the other ways that she puts that pressure on herself too is that she's carrying that responsibility of how he feels, that she sees that she's responsible for how he feels, so that she has to get it right. And if she doesn't get it right, then she's responsible for him feeling badly. Now, I want to be clear, because this could be quite a controversial point, that from what we're sharing and from the understanding that we're pointing to is that our experience comes from inside of ourselves. And so we experience the thoughts that we're identifying with. Now, that doesn't mean that we're condoning someone behaving badly. So that, as I said to her in that segment, doesn't give her carte blanche to do whatever she wants no matter what. But what it actually does when we understand that we each have our own experience that's a reflection of the thoughts that we're identifying with in the moment, that reflect the level of mood that we're at, it takes the pressure off ourselves. We allow ourselves to relax and be ourselves, and it's so much easier to be comfortable in a relationship this way when you're not responsible for how someone else is feeling. And rather than that creating worse behavior, it actually, that letting go and realizing you're not responsible takes the pressure off and actually brings out the best in people rather than the worst.
Yeah, when I was listening to you interact with her, it was kind of like, for me, it was almost like you're this optician giving her all these different lenses to try on, with all these different ways of pointing to this understanding and what you were trying to share with her. And you're kind of like saying, yeah, do you see now? Do you see it now? And at some point in this whole exchange, I felt like she did really see something. It wasn't like we would be playing choirs of angels and there being rapturous applause, but I think that you really got her to a point where she did really tune in and see something new.
I think she's starting to feel the pressure leave her, which is really good.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
And so we'll see how it goes in the next section.
For you to see that he's not fragile, he may behave fragile, but that's a misunderstanding going on within him. And what will be helpful for his misunderstanding is for you to not buy into it, and for you to not feel guilty for how he feels, because it's got nothing to do with you. And so for you being you, and sometimes you're going to step on his toes and sometimes you're not, like you just being you, innocently living your life, being how you are, you're not responsible for how he feels.
Yeah.
So how does that land for you?
It kind of again, like, eye-opening, because I've definitely taken on, like, feelings and blaming somebody for it as well.
Right. Yeah, it can go the other way too.
Yeah, so just, like, putting myself in his shoes in that sense, like, I've been like, well, you made me upset.
Right. Yeah.
And I guess it's a matter of manipulating your brain to being like, you're just upset to be upset. Like, not
Well,
like,
yeah, it's like you won't have to manipulate your brain if you see the truth in it. So that's when I want you to kind of really, like, kind of feel into what's really true. Like, where does your experience really come from? Like, if you really kind of feel into that, as like, is it really possible for somebody to make you feel a certain way? Or is it that you're going to feel whatever thoughts you're having in the moment? And the way that you can kind of check this out is you will see that there's probably times where you're in a really good mood and he behaves like a dick, and you're like, oh, whatever, not a big deal.
yeah,
And then there's other times where you're not in a good mood and he maybe behaves kind of okay and you have a bad experience. So that tells you, like, well, then it can't really be coming from outside of you, can it?
right,
Because it changes based on what your state of mind is.
right,
So the more you, like, this, why this is so powerful is it's so liberating. Because then we can never be the victim to our circumstance or to another person. Because all we are, if we're a victim to anything, it's our own state of mind. And we're not really a victim to our state of mind because it naturally clears itself up.
Right.
So we're always going to come out of it. But being able to see that that's all that we're ever at the effect of, it takes the pressure off the relationship. And it takes the pressure off of you having to be perfect for him. And it also will wake you up when you start to feel like a victim to him and realize, like, wait a second, I'm not a victim. I'm just caught up in my own thinking, and you can take care of yourself.
yeah,
Even if, you can't control him, you can still take care of yourself. So it's win-win both ways. So you take the pressure off of yourself from being responsible for making him happy, which you can't do, and getting it right and not upsetting him. And the trouble with that setup is that it's going to be more likely to get you to blow up than less likely. Like, that's putting so much pressure on you that eventually you're going to blow.
yep,
Right? So that's not working. And it's win-win the other way, because now you're also not a victim to his low moods. If you're having a hard time, if you're feeling like you're responsible for how I'm feeling, you can kind of wake up to, wait a second, this is just my low mood. I'm going to go watch TV, or I'm going to go work out, or I'm going to play that game that you're talking about. Like, I know how to be with myself when I'm in a low mood, not to get yourself out of the mood, even just to not have the low mood impact you so much.
yeah.
Right? Because you will naturally come out of it. That just happens. So does this feel like a different way of relating?
It definitely does. Like, I definitely put myself as a victim to be like, oh my God, I just made him upset and this and that. And it's like, well, no one should have that much power ever, honestly.
Right. And it just doesn't work that way.
yeah,
Like, it just doesn't work that way. So the more that you can kind of just see, like, yeah, he has his moods. He gets stirred up. He gets into a low mood. When he gets into a low mood, he sometimes blames me for how I feel, how he feels. But it's like, I'm not taking that hot potato.
yeah.
Maybe he's throwing it at you. You'd be like, no thanks.
It's like the tennis machine. It just keeps going.
Exactly. You're like, whatever. And so maybe, you have to go sit in the other room if he's lobbing them at you, but you're just like, it's not my... But the most important thing is that it doesn't land inside of you so that you feel guilty.
Yeah,
Because that's where it starts creating maladaptive coping strategies inside of you. Because now you're feeling guilty, so now you're trying to, mold yourself.
Overcompensate in other
Exactly,
places,
exactly.
yeah.
And that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So if hey, all I'm dealing with here is his low mood.
yeah,
No need for me to get into one over it. Or if you take it personally, like, well, now I'm dealing with my low mood. It's not his fault. Let me just take care of myself. I'll come out of it. You'll have so much more resilience.
yeah,
You'll also have so much more creativity about how to deal with his low mood.
yeah,
I think that if you're not taking this personally as much, and that you're not feeling guilty as much, even if, and I'm not saying I want him to stay in a low mood, but you will have so much more resiliency in the face of his low mood where it doesn't negatively impact your life in the same way.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Can you see that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, I've definitely given, I guess, in that sense, too much power.
Yeah, it's like it's a misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm.
Like somehow you have to get it right so that he's okay.
Yeah, and then I feel like I had to like justify what I said and like sell it.
Yeah.
And it's like that's not fun to do either. Like I don't.
Yeah, so it's just like, well, my bad.
I'm gonna use a lot of words. I don't want it to be because I'm protecting myself or defending myself. I want it to be like because I just won't shut up.
But if you're not feeling guilty, you don't need to do that. Like, oh, you took it that way.
Yeah, and
it's not. I don't want this to come across as like you're heartless, because it's not that. It's like not feeling guilty and responsible actually has you stay more open-hearted rather than less, because the guilt and the pressure on yourself, it kind of has you go inward and have less available to give, and that takes its toll on the goodwill that's there.
Yeah, because it definitely like shuts me down at times.
Yeah, well, why wouldn't it, right? It's like you can't feel it, you can't get it right.
Yeah, and then I like turn to a friend and just cry it out. And it's like, that's not fun either.
Yeah, no. And so the more you can see like, oh, that's you taking it personally. That's you feeling guilty. That's you thinking that somehow you could be responsible for how he feels. It doesn't work that way. Just like, if I have a pen and I drop it on, let it go, it's going to fall to the ground. That's how gravity works. It never goes up.
Yeah.
Right? It's not going to go sideways. It's always going to go. Always we feel our own thoughts. That's just how it works. Can't work any other way. We cannot be responsible for someone else, how they feel. Our own conscience will have us behave in the best way that we can. Not because we're responsible for someone else's feelings, but because we want to bring out the best in ourselves.
I definitely think so. I just, like, for me, I think letting go of the guilt would be, like, tremendous.
Yes, that to me seems really huge. So for you, what do you see about letting go of the guilt? Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, does it resonate as true to you that you're not responsible for how he feels?
Now, yeah.
It does resonate as true?
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
He can, I guess, we can all perceive the sky is blue in 20 different ways.
Well, he can believe you're responsible for how he feels. That could be his experience, but that's not the truth. Just like, someone can say, yeah, pens float up when you let go of them, but I'm like, oh, I know that they go down.
Yeah.
Right? So he can believe whatever he wants, but I want you to know what's true. Now, obviously, Angus is going to be telling him all the same kinds of things that we're talking about, but what I care about is that you see how it works. You see where your experience comes from, and you see where his experience comes from.
I think the other thing that like really resonates though is to understand, which this has never clicked before, is that he may believe something, but that's not the truth.
That's
and
right.
for me to find peace within that.
That's right, that it's okay for him to believe that.
Yeah.
Because that's how he sees it. You don't have to agree with it. You also don't have to buy into it. And he'll eventually figure it out.
What I thought was really great here is that without me having to say anything, that Alicia flipped things round and realized that, well, if she's not responsible for how Mateo feels, then he also can't be responsible for how she feels. And so she started to put those dots together for herself, that the way that she's been blaming him for how she's feeling, that it can't work that way. And that ultimately they're both better off understanding that experience comes from within. And so as much as she in the past has wanted to blame Mateo for how badly she's feeling, I think she can actually feel some relief in seeing that it doesn't work that way.
Well, I think you're guilty of underselling yourself in the sense that you feel like you didn't have to say anything. I think that this is a textbook teaching piece for me in terms of how you were guiding her. It was almost, I was thinking at the time as I was listening to this, that it's almost like you are this salesperson, and Alicia is your client, and you're selling your point of view. You're basically selling understanding. And it just feels like it would be the point in a sales experience, if you were to observe it as an independent observer, where you could see, yeah, the salesperson has really nailed it now. They kind of won them over. And the client and the way that they're responding, you've got to that point where you can now go into the office and draw up a contract or exchange, sort out the financing. She was basically, she's now really bought into what you're selling, which I think is really beautiful. And I think you did an awesome job of getting her to that point.
Thank you.
You should become a salesperson.
I was just thinking that I don't think I'm selling anything. I think that I'm just pointing her to see how it actually works. And I guess I understand your metaphor, but it's really quite simple when you see how it works.
Yeah, but really fantastic job.
Thank you. All right, let's listen to the final section.
Beliefs are people's beliefs, but I know the truth.
Yeah, you don't need to take it personally.
Right.
That's, so what? What does it even matter then? People can have whatever labels they want.
I mean, like, everybody has a label, right?
Yeah. It's like, it doesn't mean anything anymore. It doesn't mean anything about you, doesn't mean anything to you. It's like, you're Teflon in that way. Because well, so what? Someone calls you a pink elephant. Okay, whatever. Like, it doesn't mean anything to you. You're like, fine.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it only stings if we take it on.
Yeah.
Right? And you don't need to take that on. And you absolutely do not need to take on his well-being. And I don't think he wants you to take it on. I don't think he wants you to take it on. I think that he's confused about where his experience comes from. But there's so much more relief when it's 100% our own responsibility. Not that we can control it, but it's coming 100% within us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? No victims anywhere then.
That would be nice.
So for you, to the degree that you feel like you're walking on eggshells, that's the degree that you're forgetting that you're not responsible for his experience.
Completely.
Right? So that's how you measure it. So it's not his fault that you're walking on eggshells anymore. It's you forgetting that you're not responsible for his experience.
Yeah.
Right? So that's going to be your measurement. The more at ease, relaxed, and just yourself, you'll like, that's what you're looking for. And the more you're like, oh, I don't know, you're like, oh, I'm thinking I'm responsible for him. And it doesn't mean that you can even change it in that moment, but at least you'll know what's going on.
And I feel like I just won't engage understanding that. Like, I won't
Well, it'd be
engage.
so much easier not engage understanding that.
Yeah.
And the resentment goes way down because now it's not his fault anymore that you're walking on eggshells. It's like, oh, I'm thinking I'm responsible for how he feels. You're doing it to yourself. You don't need to do that to yourself.
It's because I'm being told, like, your fault, your fault, your fault, you're doing
Yeah,
this.
yeah, but it's like, I want you to be so clear about this. Like, this is like me saying, your skin is purple.
Yeah.
Your skin is purple. Like, it doesn't matter how many times I say that to you, like, whatever, lady, you're crazy. You're like, so it's like it wouldn't land.
Yeah.
So I want you to see this so clearly that he can say to you, you're responsible for how I feel. And you're like, that's your experience, but it's not mine. Like, you don't take it on.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't go, oh, God, I feel guilty. Right? Like, oh, I messed up.
Yeah.
Oh, I screwed up.
Yeah.
Like, when you're clear, you'll be like, he's stirred up, and he thinks it's my fault. Now, you may have, let's say you behave badly, right? You'll have your own conscience about, oh, I could do that better next time. So that's separate.
Yeah.
It's not you being responsible for how he feels, right? You're going to be on your own learning curve of how to behave better and, figure things out, but it still doesn't make you responsible for how he feels.
I feel like that's like a revelation.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I keep saying it, because I just want it to just land, and And for you to just see how you do that to you.
Yeah.
You make yourself responsible. And even if he tells you you're responsible, it doesn't make you responsible. It's on you if you take it on.
Yeah.
And the more clearly you see this, and I don't see it clearly 100% of the time, so it's not like there's a perfection here. This is an ongoing learning curve for me too.
Right.
But the more clearly you see it, the more inner freedom you have, and that brings out the best in you.
Yeah.
It doesn't bring out the worst in you, it brings out the best in you. Doesn't mean you're going to be perfect, but he's going to get the best of you. And that is good for the relationship, the best of you, right?
Yeah, and like it's not comfortable to be on eggshells, and it's not comfortable to like...
No, that brings out the worst of you.
Yeah, and that's why when I say like the 90% that I'm happy, it's like there's a few little percent that I'm happy at home, but like throughout the day, like as crazy and chaotic as my life is, like I do find the happiness, and I don't really take on a lot of like, you know, people perceiving me in a poor way, and maybe that's also because, you know, I've created myself to be such a strong individual as well, that I'm just like, well, I do everything great, and I'm, you know, all of that stuff. I'm not that great, but yeah. But I feel like I've boasted my own self to not fall into that on the day-to-day, but for whatever reason, I fall into it in my relationship.
Yeah, so that's kind of the blind spot where it's looking like you are responsible.
Yeah.
And so it's like now you can be like, oh, here too, not responsible. And while you're here, I would say like this whole limbo state, I would say like you're together. You're here together. You're here working on your relationship together. Just be in. Whether he's in or not, you're in. That way it's like he's clearly here. He's not leaving, at least at this point. So it's like...
Maybe later today.
Yeah, but for now, it's in. So that you're not like in that thought process too. It's like, okay, we're in. Let's take it one day at a time right now.
And that's definitely my downfall, is like I'll be like in the moment, then I'm be like, wait, is he gonna leave now, or like,
yeah.
You know,
So
I get
it's like
scared.
if you go down that rabbit hole, see how that's basically you telling yourself a scary story.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, no, I'm not going to tell myself a scary story. I'm going to enjoy here. I'm going to enjoy now, and I'm going to enjoy what is.
Yeah.
And if he can enjoy now and what is, that's not your problem, and it's not your fault. But you can do that for you.
Totally. And I think that I do have an issue with living in the moment a lot, because I live in the future in a sense.
Yes. Well, for your job, you have to.
Right.
So it's like you have a really great skill set, but it's not good for your relationship. And it's not good for you on an emotional level, for anything emotional. So you're going to be learning how to kind of be here for emotional things, for relationship things, and use that skill set for, you know, planning at work or planning your vacations or whatever you need to plan and do things with, but to get much better at like here and now, this is what is, and stay here.
Yeah, and believe it, because like I shouldn't be so insecure right now. I should
the insecurity is when you go down that rabbit hole, right? And as soon as you notice yourself going there, you're like, whoa, that's not good for you. And just kind of bring yourself back. And you'll, like when you said, you know, you realize, oh, I'm overthinking, it's the same thing. You're like, oh, I'm going down the insecure rabbit hole. I'm just going to bring myself back because it's not good for you. It doesn't help the relationship. It's not figuring anything out. It's just scaring yourself in the moment.
Yeah.
It's like having a little kid and you're telling them a bedtime story and you're telling them a really scary story. Like that's not good for that little kid to go to sleep and feel safe and feel secure. So you don't want to do that to yourself. It's not going to help you to feel better in the moment.
Yeah, no, it won't.
Yeah. But if you're doing it, there's something compelling you to do it. So you have to realize, like, wait, this doesn't make any sense, right? There's nothing good that comes from that. So you just bring yourself back into the here and now.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely need to catch myself doing that when I catch myself. Like,
well, you'll notice your feelings, like when we talked about that anxiety, or you'll just get more recognition of when you're getting elevated. And you'll catch yourself sooner. Because the only way you're getting elevated, it's got nothing to do with him, is when you're engaging with your thoughts in a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, like just referencing like yesterday, I guess like my expectation or like whatever I was thinking was like we'd leave at a certain time, but didn't express that plan either. But then just putting too much, like allowing my thoughts to get me upset when there really wasn't like a set plan per se.
Right. That it was not clear for,
Yeah.
there's an assumption maybe
Yeah.
that wasn't clear.
Yeah.
And so that's you getting on board with all that thinking.
Right.
And that's what you were feeling. And then when he comes home, you're like,
yeah.
right? And it's like, oh, but that's what you've been going down.
Right.
And then he's like, what just hit me?
Totally. And I think like a lot of it would kind of like came about was like, okay, I left work early so I could take the dog and do all this stuff and be responsible. Then I just felt like it wasn't reciprocated in a sense, the responsibility, but it's...
Yeah, but see, those are the practical things.
Right.
But where you go in your head and the emotions go up, it's like those practical things get figured. Like next time you're like, oh, well, maybe next time you could, like you work those out from a neutral place.
Right.
But when you go down that road of, frustration, anger, disappointment, like whatever that is, and then discharge it, it doesn't help any kind of resolution.
Mm-mm.
There's no learning there for either one of you in the relationship, and then the goodwill just goes even more down.
Yeah.
So it's just seeing like, oh, that's that you get on board with that thinking, and then it gets so intense, and then you let it out.
Yeah.
But the reason you let it out is because the suffering gets to a certain level that you need to let it out.
Mm-hmm.
But what I want you to see is the suffering only gets to a certain level because you've gone down that road of thinking. It's not his fault. Even if he was 2 hours late and didn't call you, I'm going to still say he's not responsible for how you feel. I'm not saying that's kind, I'm not saying it's thoughtful, but he's still not responsible for how you feel.
I can see that.
Do you see the difference?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not condoning bad behavior,
Right.
but I'm also making it clear that your internal experience comes from inside of you.
Yeah.
Right? And that separation gives you so much more peace.
I think also the piece of it is also just recognizing, okay, well, he was insensitive and this and that, but like I don't have to take it further.
Right. You can deal with that when you're not in a sped up state. Like let's say you get into a sped up state, you can't help yourself. If you at least know like, oh, but this is coming from inside of me, then you'll know to write it out. And then maybe the next day you're like, didn't really feel good when you didn't call me when you're 2 hours late. Wondering, what we could do differently. And then maybe he's like, and everybody has a reason, that logic. It's like, oh, my phone was dead and I wanted to get back as quickly as possible. And, so I didn't want to stop. Who knows what the logic's going to be. But when you see the logic, you're like, oh, okay, I can see that makes sense for you. But maybe we could do it this way next time, or something like that. Like that's just, you come together and you figure it out. Whereas the other way, nothing gets figured out.
Right.
And there's just resentment built up on both sides. Not even just on one side, you both feel bad.
Yeah, like I get angry that you pushed me to that point.
Yeah. So he can't push you to that point.
I know.
Right? He can't. And that's on you. And the more you see that, the freer you're going to feel. Because it's a victim position to feel like he can push you to that point. Nobody likes being a victim.
No, yeah. I mean, yeah, he can't really push me to that point. I can only have that reaction.
You do it to yourself.
Yeah.
You do it to yourself innocently. But it's going to become more clear that you're doing it to yourself now. So you're not going to do it when you realize you're doing it to yourself. That's the learning. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh my God, like, why would I do this to myself? So the more you see it, the less you do it, the better you get, and the more stable you feel.
Yeah.
Like, it's really liberating.
Yeah, I mean, even just thinking about, like, yesterday, had I just been like, we didn't make a plan, we said after work, whatever that means, like, not get upset over Valentine's Day because he didn't feel something, and then just
he was thinking that it wasn't right to do it. His logic was that it wasn't based on where you're at, not the right thing to do.
And I could have just sat there eating chocolate.
You could have had the chocolate.
Yeah, and just relax, and then maybe today even express like, hey, I mean, my understanding of work ending is around 5:30, and you not coming, like leaving the office till 7 without communicating, like, is something that's bothersome. Like, we could have.
Yeah, like if you're neutral, you can say that and see, like, could you just let me know?
Yeah.
Or it's not even finding the right words, it's where you're coming from. Like when you're really neutral, you can have those conversations where you've got nothing on it. There's no neutral means there's no critical edge. It's just like, hey, this is what happened for me. I'm thinking this might be better. Do you think that's a good idea? Like, I don't know if you realized it, but whatever. But it's that neutrality that allows you to figure out the logistics so easily.
Yeah.
So easily. But any lack of neutrality, off to the races.
Yeah.
Right? But the lack of neutrality comes from within. It's not from the other person.
Right. And so, like, even when I am giving those feelings, like thoughts in life, just to not maybe communicate it then, because I'm just in an emotional state.
Yeah, because you can't trust what you're going to say, and you're not seeing things clearly, and you're going to be able to work it out so much better and more easily when you're neutral.
Yeah.
And that you don't need, see, what happens is when we get upset, when humans get upset, it hurts, and so we want to feel better, so we want to release the pressure. But unfortunately, the way that we release the pressure makes things worse.
Yeah.
So the way that when we understand where our experience is coming from, we understand the way to release the pressure is to get out of our head. And as soon as we're out of our head and our mind is settled, there's no more pressure anymore. And there's also no, casualties either.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you get to see that, I get to release the pressure. And that's on your terms. It's not on his terms. You don't have to wait for him to be anything. You get to release the pressure like that.
Yeah.
And so your life gets easier, nicer, lighter, happier, independent of anything going on with him.
Yeah.
Sound good?
That sounds like a great idea.
So, just while you're here, your practice is to be yourself. And to notice when because this sounds a little bit habitual now, to notice when you're forgetting that you're not responsible for his feelings, and just kind of be on that learning curve. And then we can check in about that tomorrow and to see how it goes.
Yeah. It'll just be one of those things that I just have to remind myself. And
You just notice. Because when you've got eyes for it, you'll start to realize that, I'm walking on eggshells. You wake up to it again. You're like, but that's on me. So that's the learning curve. We just see how that goes.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I think there may have been one or two choirs of angels moments in there. I certainly feel like you could have said at some point, "Here are the keys to your shiny new vehicle, madam."
What kind of car is it?
I don't know. Definitely a luxury vehicle. Potentially a luxury vehicle. Certainly, in terms of what she's been used to thus far, it will feel like a luxury vehicle.
I was going to say, does that count as a technical knockout?
Oh, yeah, I know. I'm mixing my metaphors terribly now. I would say that's definitely a technical knockout, for sure.
Don't get me confused. I don't know the difference between a
knockout and knockdowns. We don't have to get into that. No, that was a knockout. Yeah. Your boxing arm would be held aloft as champion.
Well, I was very pleased with how much she heard in the session, and it really felt like it took the pressure off of her, and that she felt more empowered as a result of what we were talking about, and that she could see that she didn't have to wait for Mateo to feel better, for her to feel better, and that she didn't have to carry the weight and responsibility of how he feels on her shoulders. And so next week, we'll hear from Mateo. Thank you so much for listening to Rewilding Love. If you enjoyed this podcast, please let us know by subscribing on iTunes, and we would love for you to leave a review there.
iTunes reviews will steer people to this podcast who need help with their relationships.
If you would like to learn more about our work and our online rewilding community, please visit our website, therewilders.org.
Thanks for listening. Join us next week.